define linear functions like you normally would. Sometimes, especially application questions, you ask to sketch your linear graph over a restricted values of x or a restricted domain. So if we were to consider the function in front of us in green, so you got v of t equals to 500 plus 2000 t. So meaning this problem is a standard filling up problem. So V is going to be in litres and T is in hours. And our interest is only going to be for the first 4 hours of this filling up process. So trying to interpret this, at the start we have 500 litres in this water tank. And then water we're going to be pumping in at a rate of 2000 litres for every hour. So let's try to model this graph. Okay, so we open up our graph page and let's just input. So at the start we have 500 litres plus 2000 x. Now take note, I put x here instead of t. Why? Because just a reminder, your graph page can only understand the variable x and not t. If you're trying to type t here, guess what? When you're trying to hit enter, nothing will be showing. So what you then do is, in order for you to put in the restriction, you see how what I just did before, I hit control and then the equal sign button. It comes up with this window. Now this vertical line here basically means given that. So I did that before. So you've got this given that symbol here. Now we need to assign the restriction. So we're going from 0, get your equation, as to x, as to 4. All right, we then hit enter. Now as you can see on the graph page here, nothing is showing. Why? Because your window is actually not quite right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go around and we're going to manually adjust the x minimum, the y minimum, x maximum, y maximum. So let's just start with y maximum first. So I would like you to double click on it and we're then going to input an appropriate y maximum. So let's just go back to our rule here. So the highest value for v, meaning the y value on your graph page, will going to happen when little t equals to 4, or on the graph page when x equals to 4. So now we have 500 plus 2000 lots of 4, meaning 8500. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my graph page and let's do that step again. Double click on y maximum and we're going to input in, say, 9000. So just a little bit bigger than 8,500. Once you've done that, you hit tab and then it will direct you to x maximum. At the moment, default it's 10. So since our graph needs to terminate at x equals to 4, how about I'm going to input 6 because I always like to see a little bit more. Hit tab again. This is your y minimum. I like to see it a little bit down the bottom because I don't want my horizontal x-axis to be at the bottom of this screen. So in proportion to 9000, what I'll do is I'm going to say, how about I go down to negative 1000 and then hit tab for me. This will bring you across to x minimum. So I would like to, again, similar to what I did before, of not wanting to have the vertical or the horizontal axis on the side of your screen. So I will make x minimum as, say, negative 2. Hit tab. And now I have a reasonably good view of my graph. So we need to, when it comes to us trying to graph this, so we need to find at least 2 points. So typically say at the start when x equals to 0 and at the end when x equals to 4. So what you can do is you can pull up the table of values, which I'll do now. We hit control, the letter T for table values. Now, as you can see on the screen here, at x equals to 0, the corresponding y value is 500, meaning this point right here. And then at x equals to 1, we have 2500, at x equals to 2, 4500, all the way to x equals to 4. And now if you see beyond x equals to 4, say 5, 6, 7, 8, the corresponding y value It says undefined. So why? Because when you input in your rule earlier, you're basically telling the graph page to graph between x equals to 0 through to x equals to 4, and that's it. Any values that's smaller than 0, as you can see here, it's going to be undefined. And any values that is bigger than 4, it will be undefined. Hence, the set of values of interest were only going to be between x equals to 0 to x equals to 4. So there goes your table of values. So you can use this table of values and complete the graph. Alternatively, you only need 2 points. So if I were you, I'm going to label the point 0, 500 here on my graph with a closed circle. And then I'm going to label another point up here, meaning when x equals to 4, y will going to equal to 8500. So place a dot here on your graph paper and another dot here, and obviously get a ruler, join the dots. Therefore, you have sketched the graph with restriction. All right, so that's one way to do it with pulling up the table values and know, discrete pair of x and y values. Alternatively, what you can do is you can do another method, which is what I call as the graph trace function. So let's get out of this table values. For you to get out of it, what you do is you hit Control, the letter T again. Okay, so now let's use the graph trace function. So in order, graph trace function basically means you're going to input an x values and the calculator will output the corresponding y value for you. So in order for you to do graph trace function, I want you to hit Menu. We go to number 5 where it says Trace. We go across to number 1 where it says Graph Trace. And then you see this flashing cursor thing. It means please input an x value. So I'm going to hit, say, x equals to 0, 0. And then if you're going to hit Enter once, the cursor will tell you where it is. You mean right here at the start. But if you hit Enter again, it basically spits out the corresponding x and y coordinates for you. So therefore you have 1 point. Now we need to find another point, and typically let's find when the endpoint, the two endpoints, one's at x equals to 0, the other one's when x equals to 4. So we're going to do the same thing. We hit Menu, we go to number 5 where it says Trace, go to number 1 where it says Graph Trace, and then here we're going to input when x equals to 4. So hit 4 and then Enter, Enter again. So therefore if you hit Enter twice, it will point to the endpoint, the upper endpoint, and also it will display the x and the y coordinates at that endpoint for you. All right, so that's 2 ways for you to graph your linear functions with restriction.